Hi everyone, my name is Hayden Alexander Butcher. Welcome back to Hang and Vibe. This was the week of my winter retreat, so stay tuned and I will talk a little bit about that. And I will talk about some of my music that I have made. So before I talk about that, let me talk about the sermons from this week. We had a guest preacher in the morning because Jonathan is away doing a conference, I believe. But in the morning we heard from Mark Richline, and he preached on Romans 1 verses 16 through 17, which is the passage about not being ashamed of the gospel. And he gives us 5 truths that this passage teaches us about the gospel. First thing that this teaches us is that the gospel is good news, and it's good news because it is life to a world that is dying in sin. So the start of that news is that the world is dying in sin. You have to start with the bad news in order to appreciate the good news. And the book of Romans will go on to talk more about that first piece of news, which our theology sums up in the phrase total depravity. And that just means that humanity, each of us individually, are totally affected by sin. Not that we are the worst sinners that we possibly could be, but that every aspect of our lives are touched by sin. And because of that, we deserve punishment. And the good news that the gospel teaches us is that Christ received that punishment for those who are in him. The second truth that this passage teaches us is that the gospel is the power of God to change lives. And one of the points that Mark Richline pointed out is that we often fear sharing the gospel because we feel powerless. And the truth is that we are, but the gospel is the power of God. The power is not in the preacher, the person preaching the message. The power is in the message itself. And it's ultimate power because it's God's power. The third truth that this passage teaches us is that the gospel is for everyone who believes. And that's not everyone who ever lives. It's not for everyone to ever exist. It is for everyone who believes. But the key point here is that there's no special qualifications for who believes or who is chosen by God to believe. The gospel is for every type of person, every race, every culture. It's for all kinds of people. So there's nobody that we can say, if they're a Christian, we're all united. We can't say to anyone, you're not my brother or you're not my sister, just because we don't identify with them in some ways. And that means that the gospel ought to be preached to all kinds of people. The fourth thing that this passage teaches us is that the gospel reveals God's righteousness to us. And that's what God wants to do. God wants us to behold his righteousness and worship him for it. And the fifth thing that this teaches us is that the way to receive the gospel is by believing. We've talked about this in previous sermons, that to believe means to rest upon Christ. And it's a simple thing to do, but it is a difficult thing to accept sometimes, because we like to do something to earn our righteousness. But the righteousness is not ours; it's Christ's, and He gives it to us. All we have to do is believe it. In the evening, we had another guest preacher named Ben Falconer. He preached on John chapter 14, verses 1 through 7, which is where Jesus tells his disciples that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And in the context of this passage, Jesus is trying to comfort his disciples. And there's 3 reasons why Jesus wants us to be comforted. The first reason for comfort is that Jesus goes to prepare a place for us in his Father's house. He says in verse 2, "In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you?" So even at a time when really Jesus is the one who should be being comforted, because this is the night that he is going to be betrayed and sentenced to death. But he puts his disciples' needs above his own. He wants his disciples to be comforted. So he reminds them that he's doing all this so that they can be with him in paradise. The second reason for comfort is that he is coming back to take us to himself. So even though he is about to die this night, well, the next day, but be sentenced to death this night, he wants to comfort his disciples by assuring them that he is coming back. And the third reason for comfort is that Jesus is the way to the Father. He is not just a way among many ways. He is the only way to the Father. He is also the truth. He is truth incarnate, not a version of the truth, not a blend of facts and beliefs. He is the only truth. And he is the life. When we believe in him, we have life, eternal life, right now, the moment we believe. So those were the sermons, and on Thursday, I began my winter retreat. The first thing I did was I set up a campfire in my backyard and roasted some hot dogs, had some s'mores, and that was pretty fun. It's always nice to do a fire in the backyard, no matter what the weather. And then on Friday, I had the day off, so I took Pilgrim to the Calhaven Trail, and we went for a hike in the snow. It was a short hike because the snow was quite deep, and it was very difficult to walk in, but we had a good time. And then that evening we went to Grand Rapids for World of Winter, which is like it's kind of a festival, but it's like all winter long. And what it really is just they set up a bunch of art installations all over town, and you can go around and look at them and stuff. A lot of them were light up displays, so you could look at them at night, and they were really pretty lit up at night. So we walked around and looked at those. There were some really cool ones that were all light up, and one of them was like this big bonfire type thing that was just really cool to see. There was one that was like made to look like waves that were kind of shifting back and forth, and they had like music playing at some of these, so you could hear some kind of cool music playing while you watched these displays. There was one that was like hexagons that were all lit up, and the lights were moving and stuff, and it looked cool. There were a bunch of giant birds. I got to look at those from a distance. I didn't go up close to them, although I wish I had, but those were pretty cool. Then there was one that was on a bridge that was like a grid of lights that were flashing and shifting and stuff, and you could walk underneath it, and it just looked really cool. A local brewery called City Built had released a special beer for the season that they called World of Winter. And so I grabbed a 4-pack of those, and I enjoyed that while walking around town. And a lot of the displays were actually in windows. I didn't realize that at first, so I was kind of walking past a lot of them. But there was one that in particular I really liked because it had a cat I don't think the cat was supposed to be part of the display, but I just noticed this cat in the window, and the cat saw Grimm and came up and was like, pretending to rub up against him and stuff, and that was just adorable. And then on Saturday, Mike joined me, and we drove out to South Haven for Icebreaker Festival, which was like where they had ice sculptures set up all around town and stuff. So we walked around and saw some of the cool ice sculptures. There was one that was of the Lions logo, so Mike got a little picture of himself with the Lions sculpture. And there was also a chili cook-off going on, so we went up to various tents and had some delicious chilies. I don't think I ended up on the news this time, but I had my camera with me, so I actually got some footage of us walking around. And we had some nice beers as well. There was like a pub crawl, or they called it a pub slide, because, in the winter you don't so much crawl as you do slip and slide across the ice. So we got some good beers. There was one that was a gingerbread stout. It was only $5, so Mike and I got a couple of those. That was really tasty. But yeah, so that was my winter retreat for this year, and I had a pretty good time and got some good videos. So now I will get into some of my music. The first song is called I Don't Know from the album Gripping, and it's just a simple, quiet track with a bouncy beat and some cool, ethereal melodies. Next one is called 10 Below from Armaments Part 1. This is another simple, quiet track with some awesome bass and piano and synth. Sounds pretty eerie. I wish I had built upon this track and made it longer, but maybe I will at some point. And then Footprints in the Snow, also from Armaments Part 1. This has a pretty cool bassy beat, some eerie atmospheric sound effects throughout. Again, it's a pretty simple track. It doesn't really go anywhere. I guess it's kind of unfinished, but still kind of cool. Next is The Moon Reminds Me of You from the album Hope, and this is has acoustic guitar and some bass. The guitar is kind of out of tune, but I think that makes it sound kind of neat. And the outro is pretty nice with like the last 3 chords just kind of wrapping it up. Then from the album Caliber, or also known as Arison, I like the song Anecdote. This is a cool pounding beat. Sounds a bit synth-wavy, I feel like. The synth sounds kind of outer spacey to me. And then the song Fulgor from this is pretty cool. It has a nice intro with some cool bass. It cuts out and then fades back in with some distorted synth. And then there's this beautiful bell loop that comes in and plays throughout. Next track, also from Caliber. I'm just going to call it Caliber because that's what I originally called it, the album. This song has a kind of trippy bell melody and an interesting swing beat. The beat cuts out at one point and the song switches to a 3/4 time signature. And there's another trippy melody that like changes frequency each measure. And there's some like, wub wub bass in the background. Then the song goes back to a 4/4 time signature with that swinging beat. And there's a distorted drone melody that comes in. And at the end of the song, the beat cuts out again, and it's just that distorted drone that has like kind of a nice solo in the outro. The next track I just love. This track is called Glare, and it has some gorgeous bells. A cool beat comes in with some nice side chaining. And then there's these amazing synth pads. The whole track just kind of gives me vibes of like standing on a mountaintop, like a snowy mountaintop, watching a sunset. Next, from the album Sequester, the first track, Perigee Syzygy, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but this one has a kind of ethereal intro with like this off-key drone and some reversed bells. I put in some vocal samples of like, I think it was like air traffic controllers or something. I love the vibe that it gives when you hear the sort of talking in the background. It's sort of a slow track, kind of ambient, I guess, but in the second half of the track, there's a beat that comes in. Then after a few measures, a new melody is introduced that sounds pretty cool. And then the bass switches up after the beat cuts out, and that also sounds pretty cool. Feed_01. It's short but amazing. It sounds very Boards of Canada-esque to me. And then I also like the song Little Window. This one has some cool synth with some white noise. To expand on this track, but there's some other cool parts. I didn't write comments on it, but it's a pretty cool track overall. And And then Where Will I Be is another one from this album. This one has a cool, like, resonant synth and some echoey drums. I feel like it has kind of an icy vibe. And then this nice analog synth melody comes in. The beat cuts out at one point, and the icy synth plays a new melody. And then there's a part where the beat cuts out again, and the bass plays a similar melody to the quote-unquote icy synth, and then that synth joins it. From the Breaks B-sides, I like the song Monologue of a Broken Record. This has some neat ethereal synth pads, plus this shuddering synth melody. Then there's an awesome part where some piano stabs come in, and another cool ethereal synth pad. Reminds me a little bit of 9 Inch Nails, like when he uses piano in his tracks. That's kind of what my inspiration was for this track. And the next song is really awesome. This is called The Start. It has a long build-up with a simple synth bell melody. And there's a quiet synth melody in the background, which I kind of messed around with by turning knobs on the virtual synthesizer. I wanted to give this track a more organic sound, so I introduced some kind of live effects by turning the knobs like in real time. It gives it kind of a cool glitchy effect. Then this deep synth bass comes in and the beat picks up. And I also achieve the same effect with the bass by messing around with the knobs on the synthesizer. This leads into a section with some like MIDI guitar. I kind of hate this part because I always wanted to replace it with a real guitar, but that'll probably never happen. This also kind of has some 9 Inch Nails vibes, and that's what I was going for. So that cuts out to a part with a very ethereal, shimmering synth pad loop in the background. And then the drums and the bass come in kind of in waves. And then it builds up to another part with some more fake guitar. The outro is cool. It's very glitchy and ethereal sounding, and I also achieved this by, messing with the knobs on the synthesizer. The next track is called Mechaniac. It sounds stupid when you say it out loud, but that's what I called it. This is a cool, kind of industrial sounding track with some nice bass and a cool, trippy melody. A little bit into the song, the beat kind of slows down, not tempo-wise, but just It's a slower beat, and the bass picks up a bit. Then this simple sine wave melody comes in, and with it there's a bit of a change in the chord progression, and then that new chord progression continues for the rest of the song with some additional synths added gradually. Next track is called Hypoxia. This one has a trippy, kind of dissonant synth melody. There's an awesome part where the bass gets really low and sounds quite menacing. Then the beat fades out and the melody plays in a kind of muffled synth. And the beat comes back in for a little bit and then cuts out again. And then just the bass line starts playing, but then gradually a faster beat fades in with the bass line in the same tempo, but a faster beat, and it kind of recontextualizes the bass line. And then after that plays for a little bit, another synth comes in with a really cool trippy melody. And then the song Chamber. This one has a neat filtered bass and a fast beat. Some cool synth bells and a synth pad come in. The beat slows down at one point and the bass gets a bit distorted. And then the beat cuts out and the bass is muffled and starts to build up, and then there's this cool drum fill before the beat comes back in. The outro is pretty nice. It's pretty quiet and sounds pretty nice. Black Flame is a nice track. The melody is actually the outro to the track White Dragon, but in reverse. So just as a quick, to prove it, I'll play the outro of White Dragon in reverse so you can hear that. This has a pretty glitchy sounding intro, and then the synth comes in along with this like jaunty kick snare beat. And then some filtered bass comes in. Then it cuts out to a quieter part, and then this like MIDI slap bass comes in. And then there's some MIDI trumpets, and it just kind of sounds kind of, fun and frivolous. I always feel like MIDI instruments kind of have that sort of silly vibe. last track from this album is called No Sound. This one has some slow, sweeping synth, some glitchy sound effects in the background, and a very sorrowful chord progression. I really want to add vocals to this track so bad, I just don't have any lyrics to put them to. And at the end, the synth cuts out, and in the outro, it's just the glitchy background effects kind of playing for the rest of the track. And then some songs from the album Movement. First one I want to share is called Bling Beatles. This is a cool, like, reversed track. The whole track is reversed, and the drums are reversed and everything. There's some lovely synth pads and a nice synth melody that comes in at one point. And then there's another melody in like kind of a reversed plucky synth. Then there's the track Lampy. This has a nice echoey, like, analog synth loop. A pretty sine wave melody comes in. And then the beat comes in and the melody pitches up an octave. And there's this awesome sweeping bass line that comes in. At one point, this cool, like, synth drone comes in that kind of builds up, and then the beat cuts out and there's a new bass line that comes in and makes some cool chord progressions. Poppies is a pretty good track. There's a loop of a text-to-speech sample saying, "Oh, guard my soul and deliver me," which is from a psalm. I can't remember which psalm, and I didn't look it up. But it's put through a vocoder, so it sounds pretty cool. Then this, like, simple swinging beat comes in, and there's a, like, sparse sweeping synth bass line. And then towards the end, this nice, like, simple electric key melody comes in that kind of gives the song a more major key sound. The next track is called The Mighty Thumb. This one starts out with some shivering synth pads, and then this powerful drum loop comes in. And then there's this, like, almost like a PVC pipe synth. Kind of reminds me of, like, the Blue Man Group and their sort of PVC pipe instruments. And there's, like, this bass line that's kind of pitching up and down. There's a cool part where the drums cut out and there's this like distorted kind of horn-like blast. And then there's this glitchy buzzing synth that comes in and plays throughout the rest of the track. Jumping Spider is a pretty good song. This one has starts out with like a cute, playful synth intro. And then it actually transitions from a major key to a minor key, which is an interesting effect. And then this quiet bass comes in. Some nice ethereal synth pads come in and they build up to a part where the lead synth kind of wobbles up and down in octave. And the last track is really beautiful. It's called Nanometer. It has some fast-paced drums, a cool filtered bass line, and then this lovely synth melody comes in. And then there's a beautiful piano melody that plays, followed by some echoey piano chords and a really ethereal synth pad. Now, at one point there's this cool distorted drum fill. And the song fades out with like just the piano and a faint bass. Then after like a moment of silence, that distorted drum fill from before comes back, and there's a new section of the song with like an awesome distorted synth line. So I'm going to share some bonus tracks. I don't usually share bonus tracks in my episodes where I spotlight my own music, but about a year ago I discovered a website called Suno AI, where you can basically create your own songs with AI. And recently they incorporated a tool where you could input your own recordings and then let the AI kind of finish them. So I put some of my songs in, and one of them was the song Ghost Motel, which I spotlighted in the last time I shared my music. And you can put lyrics. The AI generated lyrics are a bit wacky, but then again, sometimes human generated lyrics are also a bit wacky. But it has an awesome vocal melody, and it changes the bass line a bit to give it a cool chord progression. There's an awesome bridge section where at the end of it, it plays the melody in like a cool screeching synth. It just sounds awesome. Pretty cool in these glitchy days. The rest of the track is kind of samey sounding until at the very end it cuts out and then just randomly introduces this like insane dubstep breakdown. just sounds awesome. And I'm like, forget the rest of the song. Like, just give me this. And recently, they kind of upgraded their AI, and I put in some more of my tracks and just generated some instrumental continuations. So I put in the track Falconer, and with the Suno AI, the beat kind of cuts out and a flute melody plays. And then everything cuts out except for the flute, and there's this beautiful flute melody that comes in. And then it kind of introduces a new beat that sounds pretty cool. And then there's some synth that plays that sounds very John Hopkins-esque, at least his earlier albums. Then later in the track, there's this nice bright synth melody that comes in. And then a cool kind of hip-hop beat comes in with some really nice synth. And then there's some cool flute melodies that play towards the end. Then I threw in the track In a World. The AI did some crazy stuff with this. It plays this awesome Veil of Maya-esque arpeggiated synth. That cuts out, and then it comes back in with some intense metal drum kicks. There's an awesome section with some intense drums and some industrial elements. The arpeggiated synth fades back in and then cuts out, and there's this cool little piano lick that plays. And then it kind of threw in some blues guitar, which I'm not really a fan of, but that's what you get with AI sometimes. Then I threw in the track Feed_01. And this one, it added this absolutely beautiful analog synth melody. It sounds very nostalgic and emotional. And it kind of builds up to this kind of noisy section that is kind of weird, but then it all cuts out and there's this very pretty piano part that plays. I also put in the track Perigee Syzygy, and then this one introduces this cool upbeat psychedelic beat. Then it transitions to this cool kind of dark part with some low distorted bass. The outro is kind of crazy. It sounds like it has like some rising keys. It sounds like the Dark Crystal soundtrack to me. And then with the song Where Will I Be, at one point it kind of changes the chord progression in a really cool way. And then this nice beat comes in along with a cool flute melody. Towards the end of the song, it introduces this completely new chord progression that's pretty emotional sounding. And then with the song The Start, it introduces some awesome industrial metal vibes. I love the use of the synth effects in the background. At one point, this interesting synth melody comes in, and then it transitions back to the cool industrial sound. Towards the end, this like crazy metal breakdown happens. And then there's just this cool epic outro. And the last track I tried was Mechaniac. Suno absolutely got this track right. It transitioned into an awesome industrial beat. And then it has some cool staccato effects on the bass. And then later, an absolutely fantastic cello melody comes in and plays throughout the rest of the track. Alright, so that is it for this week. I keep forgetting to mention the description below the video where you can check out all the songs that I spotlighted in this episode. So check that out. I'll put links to where you can listen to all my songs and stuff. But other than that, stay tuned for the next episode, and in the meantime, have a good week, and I'll see you next time.